Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the 2021 POOLaide webinars. My name is Katie Crysdale. Really excited that you're here with me this morning. Some of you know that I often do a little bit of a pre-show before each session starts on the hour. So I really appreciate you being here. Let me know in the chat box where you're located, what you're up to this week. It's really nice to see who's going to be joining us and where you're located across the country, whether you're in the US or Canada. Let me know in the chat box where you're based. I'm going to talk a little bit about the sessions coming up this year while we're waiting. And as people are joining us, we'll get updates as to where people are located, what's new. It's pretty incredible that it's been almost 1 year, almost to the day, within a couple weeks since I started this series. So I'm thrilled to be able to bring it back again for 2021. We've got 14 sessions scheduled this year. I tried to keep the workload manageable because a lot of us are back at work, not completely with aquatic facilities, but definitely back in the office, not necessarily. It's different for everyone everywhere, but some places are still sheltering in place. Other places, the pools are open at perhaps 50% capacity. It really does depend. But I know where I am in Alberta, a lot of aquatic facilities are starting to reopen after our second lockdown, which started December 14th. So swimming pools were required to close for the second lockdown here in Alberta, December 14th, and they just reopened as part of a progressive step program about 2 weeks ago. But even then, what the aquatic facilities could do was very, very limited. It's mostly coaching or leadership courses, very, very small groups, cohorts, one-on-one training. It's definitely not that pools have fully reopened here. So I see Heather is here from Ohio. Anybody else jumping in to this webinar, please feel free to let us know in the chat box where you're based. It's really nice to get a sense of where everyone is located. I'm up near Calgary, Alberta. I'm based in Canada, and we will have a variety of people on the webinar today, as well as this month. So today's speakers are from Canada, but we do have other speakers coming up over the next few weeks from the United States, all different topics, as well as a speaker from Australia and a speaker who's currently residing in London, England. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the schedule for the month of March. I started to talk about that, and then my hive mind, I got diverted. So we have 14 webinars happening in the month of March this year. They're not going to extend any further. I recognize people are at work. I'm busy, you're busy. So we're going to keep it kind of short and sweet. So Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the next 5 weeks. We will mostly be meeting at this time, which is 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time or almost 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we also this year have some additional sessions that I've added. So in addition to the educational webinars that you will be attending, we have socials. This was a big thing that everybody asked for last year, was having socials. So you guys can connect outside of the chat box. You can actually see each other's faces. You can use audio. And so I'm very, very excited that starting tomorrow night, so Tuesday, March 2nd, we have our first free social event on Zoom. It's sponsored by Aqua Essence Swim Academy out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. And they have a really cool session planned tomorrow night with games and prizes and an opportunity to network with each other, get to know each other. And I really hope you'll come out to that. I'm really excited to get to know everybody outside of this sphere where you're just looking at me talking right now. And I feel that that's very important for a webinar, that we do have these privacy mechanisms in place. I know a lot of us appreciate Zoom, but with this webinar delivery system, I can be confident that we're not going to get bombed by a nefarious organization. So if you're just joining us, please let us know in the chat box where you are from. We've got some California so far. I see Ohio. I see Sylvan Lake, Alberta, which is just up the road from me. I see Lauren here from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. I'm going to pop the link in the chat box for tomorrow night's social if you'd like to join us. It is on Zoom. And I'm super excited because Roshona Hyman, who was a guest last year on the webinars, some of you might remember, she and her staff have been running virtual babysitting courses online this year. They've been running swimming lessons for babies, their babies at home program where parents get in the bathtub and have a lesson on Zoom with a bathing suit. And they've really pioneered virtual programming on Zoom, especially in the breakout room. So even if you're not feeling social, come out and see what it's like to use Zoom successfully as an instructor. And we've specifically set it up so it's later in the day. The social is not at this time. The social is in the evening. So it's going to be at 5 o'clock Mountain Standard Time, 6 o'clock Central, or 7 p.m. East Coast time. And that allows people to hopefully join after work, hopefully have a quick breather. I know it for some people, it may be in the middle of your evening lineup, especially if you have kids to feed and things to get done. But by offering it in the evening, we were hopeful that we could really bring aquatic professionals out to an opportunity to network and get to know each other a little bit better. So that is currently pinned in the chat box for tomorrow night. And today I'm really excited. We have a speaker coming up in about 15 minutes, 2 speakers. Very, very excited to talk about making swimming pools more accessible to trans communities. And that topic came about because a lot of the topics that we're doing this year for 2021 are based on topics that I've seen both as an instructor trainer, a consultant, a lifeguard out on the pool deck that our industry really needs. So diversity, equity, and inclusion was definitely something I wanted to ensure that was captured in our 2021 webinars. And we didn't get the full diversity that I was hoping. I know we can do a lot better when it comes to speakers and guests, but I'm really, really happy that we're able to provide a variety of lived experiences and a variety of backgrounds to our attendees this year. So that is something I'm really, really excited about. With the webinars this year, they will be following the same format as they did last year. So I will be doing a little bit of a pre-show before each webinar, as well as a little bit of a post-show after we finish the question and answer period with each guest. So if you can't join us for the pre-show, that's perfectly understandable. Nobody is late if you're just joining us. This is kind of the best kept works secret that I do these little pre-shows. I like to see who is coming out to our sessions, where you are located. So let me know in the chat box, how has the year been for you? How are things going? What is it like this week? I know that's a lot of typing, but I've seen where some of you are from. Let me know how things are going. Are your pools open or closed? Let us know. I'll also show you guys, we've got some new merchandise this year to help support the production costs of the webinars. So the webinars are 100% free to everyone to attend, and we don't take any sponsorship or advertising money. We do have people who reach out to us who are interested in doing that, but they're not always in alignment with the goals of these webinars. So I decided this year to take a audience supported model, and we are selling merchandise on the website so that part of the cost covers the item itself and part of the cost does go to support things like the webinar software as well as video editing. So I don't take a salary or any money for my time, but I do pay my admin person and my video editing person a living wage. And so part of that is going to be the merchandise this year. So we've got the mugs, which some of you might remember. I do still have prizes for giveaways in 2021, but there was a big request to have these mugs available. They're a really nice 16-ounce mug. On top of the mugs, we've also got some patches. So let me put a link to all of the merchandise that I'm talking about in the chat box. And if you choose to support what we're doing, that's great. And if you don't, that's okay too. This is something that we're doing to give back to the industry. So we've got this year these really cool POOLaide patches. And you guys are going to be seeing, I'm learning the lighting. This is a different room in my house, so I have to figure out the lighting progressively throughout the morning. So this is 2021. This is a little patch. I believe it's 3 inches by 1 inch for scale. This is my head. So these are available for purchase on our website. These are made in Canada. They're made in Alberta by a Canadian company. So if they appear expensive, that is because they are made within Canada. They're not made in China. We do have both 2021 available as well as 2020. So if those of you who were here last year would like to have a complete set, that is an option. My Vanna is not very good. I should be, doing something like this. We also have we have these new patches, and these patches are super exciting. These are really nice, durable. They could go on a fanny pack, a bum pack, a towel. They could go on a knapsack, a guard shirt, shorts, anything like that. So this is 3 inches in diameter. We have little magnets. And the light is so interesting where I am. We have these little magnets, and then we also have these little pogs. So I'm very excited. The Pogs Aquatics 24/7, because that's what a lot of us do. And then our logo on the back. So we will be doing a bit of a pre-show for another 10 minutes or so before welcoming our presenters. I've got some links in the chat box. We've got some socials this month. So every Tuesday night in the evening, we have a free social on Zoom that is hosted by Aqua Essence Swim Academy, and I'll be there as well. There'll be prizes, games. Really, really excited for the socials. We've also got all of the great webinar sessions available on the website. I think a lot of you know that. I'll be talking about those upcoming sessions after today's presentation. And then also keep an eye on our social networks, because I'll be adding in different Facebook and Instagram lives, individual conversations with either aquatic professionals or related people that I think would really benefit all of you looking to better yourself. So let me scroll back. We've got so far Ohio, California, Alberta, Saskatchewan. I see Gretna's here from Toronto. Sherry's here from Portland, Texas. Welcome. So nice to see you again, Sherry. Leslie's here from Cold Lake. Tia's here from Newark, New Jersey. Catherine's here from Prince George County in Maryland. So glad to hear from everyone and see that you're just as excited as I am to be back this year. I do have to tell you that I never planned to come back. This was not some, crazy marketing strategy. I was really, really tired at the end of the webinars last year. Those of you who were here last year, you might remember that we had a lot of webinars. When I go back and I looked at the statistics, we had 1,582 live participants. Those are unique individual participants. That does not account for somebody, for example, Gretna or Sherry. I know you attended a lot of webinars last year. That is unique participants. It doesn't count each webinar that you attended. We were on live for 48 hours between March and May of 2020. We had 34 individual presenters. We had 27 webinar topics. We had attendees from over 10 international countries, and altogether we were one large community. So at the end of all that, I was pretty tired. I was pretty busy. I needed to take a break, and I never planned to do this again. But here we are, right? I came back, realized in November, December that there were some topics we certainly needed to cover. There was a need in our industry for this type of event, as opposed to perhaps a Zoom meeting. We all love Zoom, or we hate Zoom, but it's nice for the attendees to have the privacy of not being on, right? There's no makeup, there's no pressing your clothes. If you're me, you just kind of show up in your sweats with your coffee and enjoy the session. I also felt it was really important to continue to have these structured webinars because I know a lot of you appreciate the time and effort that our presenters put into their sessions and their topics. And so while I myself, Katie Crysdale, and our business, Lakeview Aquatic Consultants, there is also tremendous value in off the cuff social media, Facebook Live, Instagram Live. At the end of the day, for your time, whether it's in your workday or on your lunch break, we really want to maximize your learning. And in that sense, I really am grateful to our presenters that they really put a lot of time into their sessions. They treat this with a lot of respect to respect your time and your desire to learn. And so I think that's something that I'm very grateful that we can continue to offer is high quality professional development opportunities for free. And that is one of the reasons that we've got the merchandise this year. So if you decide you would like to support us, that is an option. If you don't want to support us or you can't, I also completely understand. This has been a devastating year for the aquatics industry, the commercial aquatics industry. I know the homeowner and residential swimming pool industry is laughing all the way to the bank. Staycations are meaning that pools are very difficult to build in the residential sector. But for those of us in commercial pools, I know that I've watched here in Alberta, commercial swimming pools close, staff layoffs, budget reductions, decreased planning, strategic opportunities for swimming lessons, for accessibility outreach. And so it's been a really, really difficult year. And I absolutely respect anyone who just doesn't have any money to spare that way. So if you're just joining us, please pop your name or your location in the chat box. You are not late. We are doing a little bit of a pre-show. We'll give people a few more minutes to realize that the hour is just about to switch. I know myself, I wait for those alerts on my phone that it's 10 minutes until I need to be somewhere. So we'll give our presenters a few minutes to mentally get organized, and we'll be coming together for the actual live webinar in 2 to 3 minutes. So let me know in the chat box where you're from, in the US, Canada. I need to scroll down my window here. I see more Maryland. I see Loyalist County. Rashona is here from Winnipeg, Manitoba. Very excited. I was talking earlier, Rashona and her company Aqua Essence Swim Academy, her foundation Ready Set Swim, as well as Aquademics, her tutoring company. They're sponsoring our socials tomorrow night, and that is currently pinned in the chat box. If you'd like to join me and all of us other aquatic professionals for a free social on Zoom with games and prizes and interaction in breakout rooms, I'll hope you'll join us tomorrow night. We've got Chicago. I see Charles City, Virginia, Cold Lake, Alberta, Albany, Oregon, Chicago, Austin, Texas. We actually have a presenter coming up later this month from Austin, Texas. I see Jill's here from Maryland. Rashona is also plugging the socials. I'm super excited. Also, too, because I know a lot of your names, but I don't know all of your faces. Some of you I know from social media, Facebook, Instagram, but it'll be great to get everyone together for this social. Give people a few more minutes, and then I will introduce our presenters. So just a couple more minutes. It's funny too, because I spent so much time in this software last year, and it's sometimes trying to remember who's who. So I see Jill's here, Rashona, Kieran's here from Kent County, Maryland. Sean is here from San Luis Obispo. I see Lori here from Cornwall. So let me put a couple links in the chat box while everybody's typing. So the social tomorrow night is currently up. It is pinned in the chat box. Let me go ahead and give you the link for today, our show notes. Today is Monday, March 1st. So if you are looking for any information, resources from our presenters, the PowerPoint slides, those are already uploaded on the website. If you use the link in the chat box, I'm going to pin our show notes for the moment. A couple other things I'm going to pop in the chat box is we've got our merch. If you decide you'd like to support us this year, as well as our social media as well. So coming up this week, we have sessions on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. They are all going to be at this time. If you would like to join us for a pre-show will be about 20 minutes before with me, and then post-show will be about 10 minutes, depending on how long we have after the Q&A with our presenters. So I'm going to be introducing our presenters in about 1 minute. I'll be talking about the session for today that I'm really, really excited about. For the moment, I want to let you know that we've got the social tomorrow night, Tuesday. That is going to be in the evening. That is 100% free to join us. And then also coming up on Wednesday, we are going to have, let me give you the title for our session coming up on Wednesday. Oh, it's not on my printout, but I know that the session on Wednesday is going to be Blind Girls Swim also. And I do want to make sure that everybody knows that the session on Wednesday will also be on Zoom. And that is because our presenter on Wednesday, she is partially sighted, she's blind, and this platform Click Meeting does not meet her needs, whereas Zoom will meet her needs. So you can still register to join us on Wednesday. And then on Friday, we will have a session regarding the water slides. So let me pop that in the chat box as well. I see Leah and Marcy here. I see Calgary, Woodstock, Ontario, Portland, Oregon, Corvallis, Oregon. Wonderful. Welcome, everyone. So what we're going to do, I'm going to unlock the camera and microphone for our presenters. They will also be able to unlock them as well. And I'm going to introduce them, give them a few minutes to get organized. Perfect. All right. So let me read about today's session and we can get started, respecting everybody's time. And not everybody has a ton of time to be here today. So today we are going to be talking about accessibility in the swimming pool, one of our big themes for 2021. So the title for today's session is going to be Safety in the Pool Beyond the Head Count, Creating Safer Spaces in the Water for Trans Communities. The description of this session is in 2016, the 10 Oaks Project started a monthly swim night for trans and gender diverse children and youth, many of whom had stopped spending time in the water because of the transphobia they experienced. The Trans Children and Youth Swim Night became a place to reclaim space in pools, rediscover a love of swimming, and create community. In this presentation, our presenters will share what they have learned about assessing and meeting community needs around recreation, working alongside city officials, pool staff, tackling barriers and challenges of all kinds, funding models, and creating policies, protocols, infrastructure, and safer space guidelines for trans swim nights. Our presenters will walk us through the actions that you can take to create pool programming specifically for trans communities, as well as how you can shift your current programming to be more inclusive for folks of all genders. So that is going to be our session for today. My presenters are welcome to unlock their cameras and their audio when they are ready. I'm going to pull up the slide. And so those of you who don't know what happens while our presenters are talking, Katie will be in the chat box tracking your questions, any comments, and then our presenters at the end will answer any quick questions that they have time for, and I will not be visible while they are presenting. So we've got Kaeden, and do we have a second presenter, Kaeden, or is it all you today?
Unfortunately, Hannah is sick today, so I think it might just be me. Okay. But my coworker Kamani is here too, so Kamani, feel free to jump in if you want to add anything or answer any questions.
Perfect. So Kaeden, I'll give your brief bio just to give us some background. So we're welcoming Kaeden Seaburn. He is a non-binary, transmasculine white settler, a Bachelor of Social Work student at Carleton University, that's in Ottawa, Canada, and a trans community organizer, activist, and educated from unceded Algonquin territory. In addition to their role at the 10 Oaks Project, Kaeden is a co-founder and facilitator of support and education for trans youth, Safety, Ottawa, and is the Transgender Diverse Student Support Coordinator for the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. Their work focuses primarily on pathologizing trans identities, and ensuring that trans, non-binary, and gender diverse youth have access to affirming healthcare, schools, and social services. Kaeden is passionate about camp, longboarding, and being outside, and can be found at the top of the nearest good climbing tree. I love that.
Awesome. Thanks so
Awesome.
much, Katie.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to pop off. I'll be here, and welcome so much everyone to Kaeden, please.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so thanks for coming, everyone, today and for spending some time here with us. So I have some slides that I'll go through. And yeah, like Katie shared, we're going to be talking a little bit about the Trans Children and Youth Swim Night that we've started here in Ottawa through the 10 Oaks Project, and also some tips and suggestions for making any kind of swimming or pool programming as inclusive as possible for trans and gender diverse youth. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll answer them once I get through all of these slides. Okay, so I'm from the 10 Oaks Project. My name is Kaeden. I use they or he pronouns, and I'm the community engagement coordinator for the 10 Oaks Project. So I coordinate sort of all of our different community-based programs. And the 10 Oaks Project is an organization based in Ottawa, Ontario. We run programming all across Ontario, Canada, and we do a bunch of different types of things. So our main programming are summer camp-based programs. So we run Camp 10 Oaks, which is a week-long summer camp program for children and youth from 2S LGBTQ+ communities. So that could include children and youth who identify as part of that community or who have parents or siblings or other family members who are part of those communities. We've been running that program since 2005, and that's kind of our flagship program. We also run programming for older youth. So we have a program called Project Acorn that's for older youth around ages 16 to 24 with some leadership opportunities, and there's different forms that takes depending on the year. And then more recently, we've also started running Oak Grove Family Camp, which is a weekend family camp program for 2S LGBTQ+ families. We started that program in 2017. And we also run a weekend program called Camp Lifting Leaves in partnership with the Children's Aid Society for children and youth who are part of 2S LGBTQ+ communities and who have also had interactions with the Children's Aid Society in different forms. So those are our kind of main camping programs and the core of what we do. But we also run several different we also run several different community programs for folks in Ottawa and across Ontario. So this is a list of the community programs that we run. They vary, from year to year, and things are a little bit different right now during COVID. So our Trans Children and Youth Swim Night is the main program that I'm going to be telling you a little bit about today. We started running that program in 2016 based on some community-based research that we did in Ottawa, identifying that as a big need for children and youth in our communities. And we also run a couple of other community programs. So we run one program called Shaping Parenthood, which is a monthly panel program with panels on different pathways to parenthood or family building for 2S LGBTQ+ folks. So we have panels on fostering and adoption, on different pregnancy options, on surrogacy, or other options for family building for 2S LGBTQ+ communities. And then lastly, we run a program called Families in Transition, which is a 10-week group for parents and caregivers of trans and gender diverse youth. So that's kind of a brief overview of what we do and all the different programs that we run. But I'm going to tell you a little bit more specifically about our Trans Children and Youth Swim Night and how that came about. Okay, so before I go any further, I'd love to get a little bit of a sense of who's here in the room virtually with us and what you do. And this is also an opportunity to get a little bit of practice with pronouns. So I'm going to ask if you feel comfortable. You can introduce yourself in the chat, just share your name, your pronouns, and whatever your job or your role is, what brings you to this workshop. So what we like to introduce pronouns as a way of avoiding making assumptions about people's gender identities. So at the beginning of the workshop, you might have noticed I introduced myself by saying that my name is Kaeden and I use they or he pronouns. And I do that because you might not necessarily know just by looking at me what my pronouns are, because we don't necessarily know what anyone's gender identity is or what their pronouns might be without asking them or having a conversation with them. Awesome. So I see lots of folks are introducing themselves in the chat right now. I'll give you a quick minute to finish introducing yourselves. Awesome. Thank you all for those introductions. It's nice to get a sense of who's here and what things might be of interest to you. So thank you. Okay. So here's a quick overview of our agenda for today. So I'm going to start off by giving you a little brief introduction to 2S LGBTQ+ identities. Try to make sure that we're all on the same page with some of those basics. Then I'll tell you a little bit about the history of our Trans Children and Youth Swim Night, where the idea came from, and how we set that up, and the logistics of how that runs, in case that's something that you're interested in doing in your organizations. And then I'll talk a little bit about creating safer spaces in general for trans and gender diverse kids and youth and people of all ages in swimming. So some suggestions of more structural changes that might be able to be made in different organizations or in the way that pools or facilities are set up or that program registration happens. And then also some individual things that you can do as an individual staff member working with people to make the spaces and the programs that you run as safe and inclusive for trans and gender diverse folks as possible. Okay, so we'll start off with a little introduction to 2S LGBTQ+ language and identities. And again, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. If there's anything that's unclear, I'll try to keep an eye on that, and then I'll answer more questions at the end. Okay, so I like to start off by kind of giving a little bit of this framework of what it is that we're talking about when we talk about, there's these social expectations that are placed on all of us when we're born, from the time that a baby is born. A doctor or a nurse or a midwife might decide, that this baby is a boy or a girl, and they give them a gender marker on their birth certificate, and they put them in one of these kind of boxes that we say on the left-hand side over here of either it's a boy or it's a girl. And based on that, a lot of things get planned out about our lives for us. So if you're born and the doctor decides, oh, it's a girl, they put you in this nice little pink box. And maybe, you might be given a name that's traditionally considered a feminine name or a girl's name. People might start to call you she. They might, use feminine language when they're talking about you. And it's probably going to be expected that you feel pretty comfortable with that. You identify as a girl, you feel okay about your name and the pronouns that people use for you, and that you're going to grow up and continue to identify as a woman. And then that you're going to express yourself in ways that are considered feminine. So if we think about going swimming, there might be expectations about what kind of a bathing suit you would wear, but also about just the way that you act and interact with other people, the way that you express yourself, maybe what your hair looks like, what kinds of clothes you should wear, what kinds of activities you should be interested in, all of these things that we think of as being sort of feminine things. And then it might be there might be an assumption that you would be attracted to men, and you're going to grow up and get married and have kids. And I don't know about you, but this seems like a lot of expectations to place on a baby that was literally just born. And we know that these things are not necessarily always true for everyone. This pathway and these expectations work great for some people, but not so much for everyone. So, for example, you might look at this and see some pretty obvious things. Not everyone gets married. Not everyone has kids. We also know that not everyone is straight. Just because someone identifies as male or female doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to be attracted to men or women. But the same thing is true of these expectations or these assumptions that we have about gender identity and gender expression. So when we talk about gender identity, that's really about how someone feels about themselves, how someone identifies their own gender, how they relate to other people. We don't know what someone's gender identity is by looking at them or by looking at the gender marker on their passport or their driver's license or their birth certificate, because gender is something that someone identifies for themselves. And so that's why we like to share our pronouns, because we don't necessarily know what someone's gender identity is or what pronouns might feel most comfortable for them without talking to them, because they're the only person who can know or express their gender identity. And gender expression, often we think about as being similar to gender identity, but it's not the same thing. So, if someone is wearing masculine clothes or feminine clothes or doing things that we think of as being stereotypically masculine or feminine, that doesn't necessarily tell us anything about their gender identity. And if someone wears clothes or does things or participates in activities that we don't think of as being stereotypically associated with the gender that they identify with, that doesn't change their gender identity. Someone doesn't become a woman because they put on a dress. But we have these expectations or these assumptions about how gender expression and gender identity should go. And so really we know that these expectations are not necessarily true. And so we have this other diagram here to give a little bit maybe of a more inclusive view of gender identity, gender expression, and attraction. So what we see here is that when you're born, you're assigned a gender often. So you might be given a birth certificate with a gender marker of male or female. And there's also people who don't fit into those boxes of male or female either. So there's lots of people who might be intersex or who have physical sex characteristics that don't fit into the categories of male or female that we often think about. And this is actually quite common. It's just not something that we talk about all that often. But completely separate from this sex assigned at birth, we have all of these other categories. So someone's gender identity, someone might identify as male or as female, or maybe not identify as male or female at all. Someone might identify as non-binary or gender diverse or something other than male or female. And that's completely separate from someone's sex or gender assigned at birth. They don't necessarily have to be connected. The same thing is true of gender expression. So someone might express their gender in ways that we would stereotypically think of as being feminine or masculine, or maybe both or neither. And again, that's completely separate from someone's gender identity or the gender that they were assigned at birth. And the same thing is true of attraction. So someone might be emotionally or physically attracted to people who are men or women, or people who are non-binary or have other gender identities. And again, all of those things are separate from each other. They don't have to go together. And so what that means is that, if you have someone who registers for a program and they indicate that their gender is male, that doesn't really tell you anything about any of these other categories. What someone's sex assigned at birth might be, what their gender identity might be, how they might feel most comfortable expressing their gender, who they might be attracted to. So we really want to avoid making assumptions about people based on the information that we have. Okay, does anyone have questions about any of that that's confusing that we want to be on the same page about before we keep going? Yes, no worries. If you have questions as we go along, feel free to put them in the chat. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about our Trans Children and Youth Swim Night that we've run in Ottawa, where that came from and how that came about. So the Trans Children and Youth Swim Night is one of the community programs that we've been running for a few years. We started in 2016. Obviously, it's not running right now since we're not able to have events at pools, but we're really hopeful that it'll be able to start up again in the future. And initially, it was just a one-time event. We have a Pride Week in Ottawa every year, and we thought it would be a cool event to do during that week. And it went really well, and we did a community needs assessment and some community-based research on trans and gender diverse youth's experiences with camp programs. So that's something that we do, and also with other sorts of recreational programs. And one of the things that we heard really clearly from many, many trans and gender diverse youth is that a lot of people stopped going swimming and stopped participating in any kind of recreational or sports activities because there were no spaces where they felt safe or comfortable participating in those activities, or because they were experiencing transphobia or homophobia from people around them when they tried to participate in those activities. And so when we talked about swimming in particular, a lot of youth shared that, maybe they didn't feel comfortable, they couldn't find a bathing suit that they felt comfortable wearing, they felt uncomfortable, having other people looking at them or paying too much attention to them and the way that they were expressing their gender when they went swimming. Maybe they were wanting to go to the pool, but there wasn't a change room that they felt comfortable using. If there's only a male change room and a female change room, and someone identifies as trans or gender diverse, those options might not feel very safe or comfortable for lots of people. And so there's a lot of different reasons why trans and gender diverse young people who maybe really enjoyed going swimming or really enjoyed playing sports were not doing those things anymore because they didn't feel that like there was a space where they safely or comfortably could. And so that was kind of what we wanted to address with our Trans Children and Youth Swim Night. So we did a community needs assessment, which is basically a survey that we put out on our social media asking folks if there was interest in having a program like this, having a Trans Children and Youth Swim Night, and if so, what they might want that to look like and what would work best. And so based on the feedback that we got from folks in the community, we set up our ongoing monthly Trans Children and Youth Swim Night. So this has been a monthly event. It's for about an hour. It's on Saturday evenings, and that was based on feedback that we got from folks about what worked best for them. And we did it as a partnership with the City of Ottawa. So our office is located in Ottawa. That's where a lot of our community programs are based. And so we're able to partner with the City of Ottawa to sort of reserve this 1 hour at this one pool downtown. And it was a fee-for-service program. So folks who came to the program would pay to go swimming the same way as any other free swim time. It was the same rates. And so that way we didn't have to rent the pool from the city of Ottawa. We just had it reserved for this particular event. And so folks would pay whatever the fee was to go swimming for their free swim time. And we also had a donation mechanism so that if there was folks who were interested in coming swimming but couldn't afford the fee, we could cover that for them. And so we let folks know to get in touch with us or let us know if that was a barrier or if they needed help covering that cost. And the swim was open to trans children and youth ages 0 to 24 and all of their friends or family members. So there was a wide variety of folks who accessed the swim, wide variety of ages, and folks were welcome and encouraged to bring siblings or parents or friends or partners. So we had lots of different folks accessing the swim during that time. And we also did some training for all of the staff at that pool. So any staff who were going to be the lifeguards or the staff who were on duty during that time, during that hour, we had workshops that we did for those staff every so often to make sure that the folks who were attending or who were part of that program had gotten some training pretty similar to this and had some conversations about what it would look like to make sure that that space was really safe and comfortable for trans and gender diverse folks. And we also had 10 Oaks staff present at each event. So there would be a couple of lifeguards and then at least one person from 10 Oaks who was there as well to make sure that things ran smoothly and connect with youth and families who were there. The other thing that we did was we converted all of the change rooms and washrooms around the pool area to all gender washrooms and change rooms during that time. And that's something that's really important for lots of trans and gender diverse folks. Having gender segregated washroom or change room areas is really inaccessible for lots of people because someone who doesn't identify as male or female or who might not align with expectations that other people would have about what that means don't always feel safe or comfortable in gender change rooms. And so often lots of pools might have, one family change room. But for this event, because it was closed to only trans and gender diverse folks and their friends and families, we just converted all of the washrooms and change rooms to be all gender to make that more accessible for folks. And so that there wasn't, a big lineup for that one stall. And we also put together some safer space guidelines specifically for the event. And those were created in consultation with the community and trans and diverse youth groups in Ottawa. We're given an opportunity to contribute and let us know what they would want to be included in those guidelines and how we can make the space as safe and inclusive as possible for all of the folks who are coming to it. So those guidelines were posted on like a whiteboard or on a piece of chart paper at all of the events in a space where people could see it. And it was clear that the pool was reserved only for that event at that time. So there weren't other people accessing the pool who maybe wouldn't know that the event was happening or might make comments or perpetuate some of those challenges that folks had been experiencing trying to access pools at other times. And so that was a really big success for us. A lot of people were really appreciative of having that space. We had a really good turnout for many of those events and it went really well. So that's kind of what we did. Awesome. I'm seeing a couple of questions in the chat, so maybe I'll go to those first. I'm seeing someone is asking about wanting to rename a family change room. Is there a more appropriate name you would suggest? Thinking inclusive change room. Yeah, for sure. I think it depends, what the setup is for that change room and in what ways it's inclusive. So a couple of things that I've heard before would be maybe an all gender change room, if that's kind of the purpose, is for it to be accessible to folks of all genders. You could also, I'm seeing someone says universal is really good, or just an accessible change room if it also has, is more accessible for folks using mobility devices or who need other accessibility needs with that change room. But yeah, all of those I think are great. I think as long as it's clear that, the purpose of it is for it to be accessible to everyone, including folks of all gender identities and also who have different accessibility needs, I think that's great. And then I see someone asked about what format did we do for the community engagement? Yeah, I think we just did some sort of social media promotion. So we had a Google form survey, things like that. And because as the 10 Oaks project, it was our communities that we're already quite connected to, who we were reaching out to. So we're already connected with a lot of trans and gender diverse youth and their families through all of our other programs. So it was pretty easy for us to reach out and connect with those folks. We also partnered with some trans and gender diverse youth groups or other organizations that serve trans and gender diverse youth in Ottawa. So there was participants from a local youth group who were able to participate in creating the safer space guidelines and contributing to ideas and suggestions about how that program might look. So it might be different depending on who you're already connected with. And it might be helpful if there's other organizations in your area who do work specifically with 2S LGBTQ plus communities or with trans and gender diverse youth. those might be good folks to connect with as well. Yeah, awesome. So let's move on and talk a little bit about, in general, things that we can do to create safer spaces. So these would apply if you're putting together a specific event for trans and gender diverse folks, but also for any programming or events that you're already running in the pool. These are things that you can do to make those existing programs as safe and inclusive as possible. So firstly, these are sort of more structural suggestions. They're not necessarily things that one person as an individual can do unless you're the right person, but helpful things to think about in your organization. And even if these aren't things that you necessarily have control over, these are options that you might be able to bring back to an organization as suggestions or things that your organization might be able to do. So the first thing is thinking a lot about gendered spaces. These are spaces that often are not accessible to folks who identify as trans or gender diverse, or to other folks in the 2S LGBTQ+ community. So if you have spaces in your organization that are gender segregated, whether they're washrooms and change rooms or specific programs that are designated for people of particular genders, thinking about, you're just thinking critically about them. So it doesn't mean that there should never be any spaces or events that are targeted at people of specific genders. I think that those can be really valuable, but just to think critically about why a space is gender segregated or why it's for a particular folks with a particular gender identity, and whether there's anything that can be done to make it even more inclusive and safer. So thinking about, is this an event or a program or a space that could be for people of all genders? Would that cause problems? Could an all gender or a gender inclusive option be added? So if we're thinking about change rooms, maybe there's value, maybe it makes sense to continue to have gender specific change rooms, but maybe there can also be an all gender change room as well. If there's situations where folks are being separated based on gender, is there maybe an option for there to be a male and a female option and an all gender or gender inclusive option? Or can people be given a choice about which group they're put with, so that we're not making assumptions about what someone's gender identity is or where they would feel the most comfortable? And the bottom line is that trans youth should always be grouped wherever they're the most comfortable. So if there are programs or spaces that are specifically gender segregated where there's not an all gender option, folks who identify as trans and gender diverse should always have the option to participate in whichever program they feel the most comfortable in. Okay. The next thing is around forms and marketing. So if we think about like the promotion that's done for different events or the registration forms that folks might have to fill out to sign up for an event, we want to make sure that they're inclusive as inclusive as possible of all of the people who might be accessing the program. So we want to avoid making assumptions about gender or sexual orientation or family structure, because these are things that can make people sort of question what the experience that they're going to have might be like once they get into the program. So even if someone is able to fill out a form and kind of make it work for them, having inclusive forms is a really good way to signal to people that inclusion is something that your organization is thinking about, and that hopefully they'll also feel safe and respected when they're actually accessing the program. So a few examples of that might be if there's forms for youth programs that are asking for information from parents or caregivers, asking something like parent 1 and parent 2 rather than mother or father. So not assuming what someone's family structure might be, what the gender identities of their parents or caregivers might be, or even how many parents or caregivers they might have. When we're asking questions about gender, maybe it's possible to ask for gender and give a blank line where people can write in their gender identity rather than having checkbox options. Just kind of taking as many steps as possible to avoid making those assumptions about someone's gender identity or their family structure. And also to think about why we're asking certain questions. So if we're asking a question about someone's gender identity, why exactly is it that we're asking? And what is it that we really want or need to know? If we want to know someone's gender identity, maybe to know who's going to be part of the group or how to refer to them, maybe it makes more sense to ask for someone's pronouns so that we can know that we're being respectful of the pronouns that someone uses. So thinking about why it is that we're asking certain questions and exactly what information it is that we need to be able to serve that person. Okay, I'm seeing a question someone's asking about, lots of systems might only have male or female options or might only have specific options, and it's maybe hard to get around that. Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. And I think being as transparent as possible about that might be the best solution. So you might not necessarily be able to control, your registration system or what options are available in that, especially if you have to enter someone's information into the system and maybe it requires gender identity. So maybe there's options to, maybe it's possible for someone to not answer that question. Maybe there's a note that could be included on the form saying like, we recognize that these are not the only gender identities that exist. This is a limitation of our software and that's something that we're working on. So I think being as transparent as possible about those limitations and that, if it's possible for you to maybe have a conversation with the folks who make the software, obviously those are slow processes, but yeah, I've seen someone mention a software change request. I know that is, those are things that are changing over time. And depending on what jurisdiction you live in, there might already be precedent for that. So for example, in Ontario, gender identity and gender expression are protected grounds of discrimination in the Ontario Human Rights Code. And that means that people need to be able to indicate their gender identity, including if it's a gender identity that's not male or female. And so a lot of organizations right now and a lot of software companies are going through that process of updating those options and making sure that it's accessible for folks. So that might be something that's coming or that you can make come even faster. Yeah, I see someone asking if it's appropriate to remove the gender section completely and put a pronoun space instead. Yeah, I think it's all about your organization and what information is most helpful to you. So if there's a specific reason that you need to know someone's gender identity or something specific that information is being used for, I don't think it's always a bad thing to have that question. But if you actually maybe don't need it for anything, maybe it would be more helpful to know someone's pronouns instead. And maybe we don't necessarily need to know someone's gender identity. Or I think the best option in any case when we're asking questions is to have a blank line. So of course that makes it more difficult for like statistics or if it's something that has to be entered into some software. But if it's possible, if we are asking for someone's gender identity, to just give a blank line, gender line, the same way that we would ask for someone's name, and then they can write in their gender identity. And so that way we make sure that people can reflect the gender identity that aligns with their identity. Yeah, I also see someone asking about how to answer the request from a parent when preference is for a female instructor. Yeah, I think that's a good question, and it might depend on the situation and what options are available to them. I think there's lots of really good reasons why someone might specifically request to have a female instructor, and if that's an easy option for you to provide, I don't think there's any harm in providing that. But I do think it's important to just be thinking about gender identity throughout that process. So if there's staff in your organization who might also identify as trans or gender diverse, and as much as possible, we want to avoid making assumptions about people's gender identities. So, and that would include staff. So if there is a staff member who identifies as female, who is someone who could be running that session, I don't think there's any harm in providing that option to people. But also to make sure that we're setting that standard of those values of not making assumptions about people's gender identities and being respectful of the gender identity that someone identifies with. Can we identify why the parents want a female instructor? Yeah, it's a good question. I think it might depend on the situation, and I am obviously not a swim instructor, so I don't know too much about probably the biggest request yet. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think that I have a good answer to that. I don't know too much about the logistics of how swim instructors are set up. Yeah, it's a good question. I think that the biggest thing is to make sure that we're not making assumptions about people's gender identities. But I think that if you have a staff member who identifies as female and who's comfortable running those sessions, and that's something that's possible for you to do, I don't think that there's a problem. Yeah. I'm going to move on to the next slide, but there will be lots more time for questions later on. And maybe other folks in the chat, if you have experience with this or thoughts about this, please feel free to share as well. Okay, so another thing that's really important to think about in terms of sort of forms and registration is around legal name and gender markers. So whenever it's possible, it's best to do registration and give people an opportunity to include their preferred name and pronouns and to use them wherever is possible. So even if you need to know someone's legal name, say for like health and safety reasons, it's also possible to give an option for folks to indicate their preferred name. So you can have their legal name on file with their health card information or whatever information is necessary for you to have. But when you're actually interacting with that person, it's important to use the name that they use and to have that included in their file or in their registration information so that there's a clear option for folks to communicate that and not have to go out of their way to find the right person to talk to or advocate around. There's a lot of different reasons why someone might have a preferred name. It's not necessarily just people who are trans or gender diverse, but it's definitely something that's important for a lot of trans and gender diverse people. Some youth might also use different names and pronouns at your program compared to at home. So there might be trans or gender diverse youth who are not out at home or who don't have support from their parents or caregivers. And it's still a good idea to use the name and pronouns that that person is asking you to use. And maybe to have some conversations with them to make sure that we're not outing someone without their permission. So if a young person shares with you that they go by a different name or pronouns and they don't want their parents or caregivers to know, that's totally okay. You can use the correct name and pronouns for them during the program in whatever spaces they ask you to use. But it's really important not to share that information with someone's parents or caregivers or other people without their consent, because that can put people in danger if they're outed to an unsupportive family member, especially young people being outed to folks that they live with, can put people in really challenging situations. And I think it's really important for trans and gender diverse youth to have support from other adults in their lives, especially if their parents and caregivers are not supportive. So if someone has parents who they are not out to or who are not supportive of them, it makes it even more important for them to have other safe and caring adults in their lives who can be supportive and affirming of their identities. And someone's legal name and gender should be kept confidential. So even if someone is out to their parents or caregivers, maybe they don't want other people in the program to know that they're trans or gender diverse or to know what their legal name or gender marker is. And it's really important to keep that information confidential and not to share it without someone's consent. Just catching up on the chat here. Yeah, I think those sound like really good suggestions. So it sounds like, asking someone for a reason sounds like a good plan if that's an option for someone to provide that. And there might be lots of different situations, I think. There could be lots of really good reasons why someone would feel more comfortable with an instructor of a specific gender. But there also might be some of those stereotypes coming into that we don't want to support. Yeah. And yeah, I think that like someone saying, lots of people go by their middle name, or maybe, their name is Matthew, but they go by Matt. There's lots of different reasons why someone might have a preferred name. So it's a helpful thing for lots of people. Okay, and then the next thing is hiring diverse staff. So it's really important for lots of communities, including 2S LGBTQ plus communities, to see positive role models for kids and youth, and to see people who reflect their identities as part of the programs that they're participating in. So for lots of trans and gender diverse young people and people of any age, often people are looking for those signs that a space is going to be safe and inclusive for them. And seeing people who look like them or who share their identities, working in the programs that they're accessing is a really big way to make those programs safer and more inclusive and feel more welcoming for people from a variety of different communities. And it shows that you're putting your money where your mouth is, that the people who are actually part of your program and who are facilitating your programs are also part of the communities that you're running programs for, is always going to be a good thing. Okay, then the last thing in this sort of vein of structural suggestions is around staff training. So training like this, I think is really helpful for folks to have an idea of things that they can do to make their programs and the pools or other spaces that they're working in safer and more inclusive for 2S LGBTQ plus youth and families. I think particularly around supporting folks' physical and mental health, and just avoiding making assumptions about the people who are part of our programs, and making all of those small changes to make programs safer and more inclusive for trans and gender diverse youth. Staff training can be a really important part of that. So if you have frequent trainings for all of the staff working in your pool or in your programs, this could be a great topic for staff training. Yeah. And then also providing ongoing resources and support. So I think that Katie's sharing some resources from our organization. And if you look around for other organizations that might be in your area, there's lots of different organizations that offer training on 2S LGBTQ plus inclusion or working with trans and gender diverse young folks, and other resources or reading materials or posters or other resources that might be helpful. Okay, I'm just gonna catch up on the chat and then we'll go into some of the individual things that you can do. Awesome. Yes, and if anyone else has resources, absolutely feel free to add them into the chat. Okay, so these are some more individual things that you can do as an individual staff member working with people in whatever capacity that is. So one thing is using names and pronouns. We talked about it a little bit earlier in terms of registration forms and providing folks an opportunity to share the name and pronoun that they use. But it's also really important as an individual staff member to make a really big effort to respect people's chosen names and pronouns and people's individual identification, regardless of how they might look. So someone might use a name or pronoun that doesn't align with the expectations or the assumptions that you have about them based on how they look, or the bathing suit that they're wearing, what their hair looks like, all of those sorts of things. But it's really important to make sure that we're checking in with folks and using the names and pronouns that someone feels the most comfortable with. So if you're running a class or a group with a group of folks, giving people an opportunity to introduce themselves with the name and pronouns that they feel the most comfortable with might be a really good way to get to know the folks that you're working with. Particularly when we think about folks who might not have support from their parents or caregivers, someone's preferred name or pronouns might not necessarily be included on their registration, either because the person who registered them is not supportive or affirming of their identity, or maybe they didn't know that it was an option to include that information on their registration. Maybe something's changed since they registered. So it's always a good idea to check in with folks about the name and pronouns that feel most comfortable for them. And if you notice, or you know that maybe other people in the space are not using the name and pronouns that someone prefers, or that someone prefers a different name or pronouns from what others are using, you could check in with that person and find out who knows about the name and pronouns that they prefer to use and where they'd like that name and pronouns to be used. So maybe you have a close relationship with someone and they've shared with you their identity or a name or pronouns that they would feel more comfortable using, but maybe they don't want other people to know that yet. And so maybe they would prefer that you actually not use it around other people. On the flip side, maybe other people actually should be using the right name and pronouns for that person, but they've been making mistakes, or maybe they're not thinking about it or haven't been making an effort to use the right name and pronouns. And maybe that's a situation where you can help to advocate for someone and correct other people who are not using the right name and pronouns. So it can be really important to check in with people and find out what would feel most comfortable for them, where they want you to use those name and pronouns, around who, and what they want you to do if you hear that other people are not using the right name and pronouns. And then similarly, checking in about how they'd like to be referred to around parents or family members, or if there's other people who they don't want to know about their identity or the name and pronouns that they use. Another big piece of this is confidentiality. So like we talked about, it's really important not to share information about someone's identity with other people without their permission. And this includes parents and caregivers of trans and gender diverse youth. So we repeat this a lot because it's so important that if someone shares something with you about their identity, that might be a really big deal, and that might be something really personal and private that they're sharing with you, and they might not want anyone else to know. And so it's really important to be respectful of that if someone does not want other people to know about their identity, but also that if someone does want everyone to know about their identity, if someone wants everyone to use the right name and the right pronouns, that's important to know too, so that you can help to advocate for them and make sure that other people are using the right name and pronouns for them. And if you see something, say something. So if you hear, other people or other participants in a program, other people in the pool, making comments about someone's gender identity or their gender expression, their sexual orientation, or the way that they're expressing themselves, it's really important to intervene when we hear those comments being made and to explain why it's not okay, to challenge that language, and to set a standard of what your values are in that space, in that program, or in that pool, to let people know that that's not a space where we tolerate transphobic or homophobic comments or bullying, and to explain to someone why what they said is not okay, maybe if it's a young person or if they're not sure. And then to check in with the person who's been experiencing that afterwards and find out maybe if this is something that's been going on previously that we didn't know about, or if there's more that you can do to support someone and make sure that they're feeling safe and supported in your programs. Okay, so another thing that we keep coming back to is about assumptions. It's so important not to make assumptions about gender, gender expression, sexual orientation, or family structure. And often this comes out in little comments that we make without really thinking about it too much. So things like saying boys and girls, is making an assumption that all of the people who are part of that group or part of that program are either boys or girls. And there might be people who identify with other gender identities. So saying things like everyone is a really easy way to avoid that, but something that might make a big difference for folks. Maybe saying things like when you have a boyfriend or when you have a girlfriend, is making these assumptions about what someone's gender or sexual orientation is, or what their future family structures might look like. So you can instead say something sort of similar, like if you're ever in a relationship or if you ever get married. These are sort of simple adjustments that can avoid making those assumptions about who someone might be attracted to or what kinds of relationships they might have in the future. And this also comes up when we're talking about a specific person. We want to avoid making assumptions about what their gender is. And I think especially in swimming settings, this is a really easy thing to do because we often see the bathing suit that someone's wearing, and that is what gives us information about someone's gender. And that's not necessarily the case. So someone might be wearing a bathing suit that we think of as being, a male or a female bathing suit. That's not necessarily their gender identity. And so just incorporating that into the language that we use when we're talking about people, we can address people without using gendered language. So saying things like, hey, you, instead of identifying someone as male or female. And when we're talking about someone, maybe using pronouns, if we don't know what someone's pronouns are, it's easy to use someone's name instead to avoid using pronouns, or to use a gender neutral pronoun like they. So if you're talking about someone in the third person and you don't know that person, you're not sure necessarily what pronouns they use because you haven't heard it from them. You could just say like, oh, they were wondering where the bathroom is, or rather than using gendered pronouns. Okay, and then along with that, we also want to avoid organizing folks by gender as much as possible. So we talked about that a little bit in terms of setting up programs and the physical spaces in pools or different spaces, making sure that there's options for people to not necessarily, be in a male change room or a female change room or spaces like that. But the same thing is true when we think about programming or, even within a group. So let's say you're splitting people up to make teams. We want to avoid splitting people up by gender and try using other things instead. So some of the fun examples that we use at Camp Ten Oaks are things like separating people by birth month. So, people who are born in the first half of the year, people who are born in the second half of the year, by bathing suit color, by something sort of silly like dog versus cat lovers, or people who believe that tomatoes are a fruit versus a vegetable. It's something you can get creative with and have fun with. And that's going to be more inclusive than forcing people to choose whether to be in a boys group or a girls group. Even if we give people the choice of which group they want to be part of, there's still lots of people who don't identify as male or female. So it's important to have other options outside of that so that people aren't forced to declare what their gender is or to identify as male or female. All right, and the last thing is talking to other pool users. So often I think there's a lot of fear about what people might say, what kinds of questions we might get from maybe parents of other kids who are accessing services at the pool or other people who are in the space. What will other people say about our all gender change room or inclusive posters that we have up, or any of these steps that we're taking to be safer and more inclusive. And so some basic points that we recommend are reiterating that everyone is welcome and included in the program. And just like you would do everything to make them or their child feel safe and comfortable and supported in the pool, you're doing the same for everyone else, and that includes trans and gender diversity. If you're in a space that has, or in a jurisdiction that has human rights legislation, so if you're anywhere in Canada, gender identity and gender expression are protected grounds of discrimination in the Canadian Human Rights Act and in all provinces. So you're following this human rights legislation, and that's the case in lots of different places. And even if there isn't specific human rights legislation that mentions trans and gender diverse people or that mentions gender identity and gender expression, it's still so important for us to be making sure that everyone feels safe and included and supported in the pool, just in the same way that we would want them or their child to. Another thing that you can do if you're getting really specific questions, or if someone is maybe very angry, is trying to identify exactly what someone's concerns or worries or fears are, because often these questions or concerns come from a place of fear, and often it's not well-founded fear. So people, one thing that we hear a lot about in the media is this sort of controversy around bathrooms or change rooms being inclusive to trans and gender diverse people. So someone might, come up to your desk and be really angry about the fact that trans or gender diverse people are allowed to access your gendered change rooms. And so people who, are trans women or trans men might be using the women's or men's change rooms. And someone might be very angry about that. And often that comes from a place of fear, from the sort of fear-mongering media coverage that we hear about trans people being dangerous to cisgender people, and particularly to cisgender girls. And what we actually know is that is not true. It's not founded on any fact. It just comes from a place of transphobia. And so if that's why someone is asking, because they have this fear about their child's safety, trans and gender diverse people are not a threat to anyone else. And actually, trans and gender diverse people are a lot more likely to experience violence in bathrooms and change rooms than they are to inflict violence on anyone else. So trying to identify what those specific concerns or worries are and address that in particular in some cases can be helpful. Okay, so those are the slides that I had for you today, but I would love to talk more about anything that's coming to mind, any questions that folks might have based on those slides or other questions that you have that have been coming up in your organizations about supporting trans and gender diverse young folks.
So I'm going to give people a couple minutes to throw some questions in the chat box. I want to say, Kaeden, thank you so much. So far, this has been incredible. You've really successfully broken down a topic that I know a lot of aquatic professionals want to address, but they either don't have a lived experience personally to start from, or they just don't know where to start. So I've seen so many strategies in the PowerPoint slides, which are available, everybody, on the show notes for today. So you are welcome to go to the show notes for today's session, which I'll link in the chat box again, and download the slides. They've been graciously provided by our presenter today. I want to make a couple of comments while you guys are thinking of your questions. Please put them in the chat box. Kaeden is available to answer them. I love what you were saying, Kaeden, about how much people, these individuals, these communities, they have stopped participating in swimming. And I think that's a big thing that we're missing in aquatics. Too often there's a narrow-mindedness of, well, they don't come to the pool anyway. Why should we accommodate? And we're preventing many individuals from experiencing the joy that we all have for swimming. So can you talk about what it was like for the participants in your trans swim nights to get back in the pool? What was like, I'm assuming they were thrilled.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's such an important point that sometimes gets missed when we're having these conversations. And just like you're saying, you might look at the folks who are accessing your pool and say like, oh, I've never worked with any trans or gender diverse youth in this pool. And that's probably because either they're not coming to the pool or because they don't feel safe sharing their trans or gender diverse identity. And that's the case for so many people. I know a lot of the trans and gender diverse youth that I work with have stopped participating really in any kind of recreational activities. Sports are often gender segregated. All of these spaces are often really inaccessible to trans and gender diverse communities. And yeah, I think it's a really big deal to have these programs and have a space for people to be able to connect with each other. I think trans and gender diverse children and youth, are always looking for ways to be able to connect with each other. And I think it's important to have any kind of social spaces for folks to connect. And I think that the swim night is such a great way of doing that because it gives people an opportunity to connect and also have something to do. It can be kind of awkward to be able to connect in just in a room sitting around a table and not quite knowing what to say. And I think because often people feel so uncomfortable or don't feel like they're able to access those pools or other spaces like that, I think it also, with that pool that we were able to partner with, people, now know what that space looks like, know how it's set up, know that there is an all gender change room that's available. They know that the staff have gotten training. And so even when they're not coming to that particular event, I think it still makes participating in swimming in general more accessible for people and gives people an opportunity to maybe try out different bathing suits when they're not sure what's going to make them feel the most comfortable. Or, I think it's so important for people, and I think people really appreciated being able to have that space to connect.
So I definitely agree with you on the bathing suits, and we're going to get to your question, Jennifer, in just a moment. I think bathing suits, we could have a whole sub conversation about the fact that bathing suits are not even just gendered; they're based on cultural assumptions, right? In some cultures, it's okay to wear a string bikini; in other cultures, acceptable to wear a burkini. And we bring our own biases and our own lived experiences. Myself as a white middle class person, I just wear whatever, right? Other people don't have that experience or even access to bathing suits. So that's, for any program in any facility, we should be looking critically at what bathing suits we require our participants to have, because there's this mistaken notion that it's based on health regulations. And I can tell you as a certified pool operator instructor, a lot of that is just made up. It's not real. We need to look at the law or the requirements in our areas. Let's look at Jennifer's question. She asked, in the moment, how do you address kids that are confused when asked their preferred gender?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that's actually a great learning opportunity to be able to have that conversation. And, it doesn't need to be an hour-long lecture like this was, but I think that often it can be really scary to have those conversations with kids because we assume that they'll be confused or have questions, or maybe we won't know how to answer those questions. But actually, what I have found is that kids are often very open-minded and might be sort of curious. Something might be new to them, but often are really just want to know the answer, are kind of curious, and you can give them an answer and they'll say, okay. And that's kind of the end of the conversation. So often I think it's less scary and traumatic than it feels like going into it. But often the conversations that I have with kids, I might say something like, I might introduce my pronouns to start out with. So when I work with kids, I might say like, "Hi, my name's Kaeden. I use they or he pronouns." Um, I might explain a little bit about what pronouns are and why I'm saying that. Like, often when we talk about people, we use words that are gendered. And so if I tell you that I have a friend and I refer to my friend as he, you might assume that my friend is a boy. And so it's important for us to use the pronouns that everyone feels the most comfortable with. And I'm telling you my pronouns so that you know what pronouns to use for me. And if anyone else wants to share their pronouns with the group or with me, to give an opportunity to do that. I also think it's not ideal to force everyone to share their pronouns or to set up an expectation that everyone has to, because there could be lots of different reasons why someone doesn't want to, right? Someone maybe just has never heard of pronouns before and feels a little bit awkward and doesn't know what that means. Or maybe someone actually does identify as trans, but isn't sure if they feel ready to share that yet. I think especially when you're the only trans person in a space, for people who don't identify as trans, being asked their pronouns might feel like kind of no big deal. And so if you go around in a circle and everyone shares their pronouns and maybe there's like some giggling happening and people think it's maybe a little bit silly or not necessary, if you're the only person in that space who is trans or non-binary and who might be sharing pronouns that are different from what people expect, that can also be a really scary or uncomfortable situation to be in. So I think my go-to is usually to introduce my own pronouns as an opening and explain what that means and answer questions about that. And that also gives an opportunity for other people to share their pronouns if they want to. So I'll often do things like maybe a get to know you go around where we also ask like a silly question. So it might be like, if you want to, you can share your name. If you want to, you can share your pronouns. And if you want to, you can answer the silly question. And that kind of breaks it up a little bit more rather than having a lot of emphasis on people like being required to state each of these things or give all of this information or feeling like they have to share their pronouns. But it opens a space where people can share their pronouns if they want to, because I think it's also really scary if you want to share your pronouns so that people use the right ones, but no one's mentioned it. And maybe that kid then maybe doesn't know if you know what a pronoun is. Maybe you're going to be confused or doesn't know what your reaction might be if they share that. And so I think it's about opening that space so that if someone does want to share their pronouns or, maybe it's not even that day, maybe it's like 2 months later when someone is thinking about this and is remembering that you talked about pronouns, and maybe that means that you're a safe person to talk to. So yeah, that's a really good question.
I want to talk about bathing suits a little bit more, and then we're going to talk about structural space in the pool, because I know some people have questions about that. So Kaeden, can you talk about what Ten Oaks did when you advertised, we're going to have this swim, if this is what it's going to cost, you can attend if you're comfortable. What was the messaging that you gave to your community about bathing suits? Not the pool side, but in terms of, I recognize that individuals buying a bathing suit is expensive. Maybe they are not ready to take a leap and buy a new bathing suit, or maybe they are not comfortable with their body. They want to wear t-shirts or clothing. What did you guys say about bathing suit requirements that you had maybe previously discussed with the city or the facility?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So what we said in all of our promotion and what we did for the event was that we said that everyone was required to wear bathing suit bottoms, and that could be any clean clothing. So it could be like a traditional bathing suit, could be a pair of pants, a pair of shorts, anything they wanted, as long as it was like not obviously really dirty, basically. And tops were optional but not required for anyone. So we didn't differentiate based on gender identity or any like physical characteristics. Anyone could wear a shirt or not wear a shirt if they wanted. And that was also possible for us because it was a closed space. I think there might be a little bit more negotiating of that if there's other folks who are in the pool at the same time. I'm not sure, depending on what jurisdiction you live in, what the laws are like, and what sort of the options are, but that's what we did. And that worked really well. And people really appreciated that, particularly folks who maybe typically would be told that they would have to wear a shirt or some sort of top in the pool, but who might identify as male and maybe like, feel sort of comfortable and would feel more comfortable wearing just a pair of swim trunks or a pair of shorts and not having to wear a shirt, even where maybe normally there would be an assumption that they should. That was actually really empowering for a lot of people, and people really appreciated that. So yeah, that's what we did, and it worked really well for us.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good navigation of the individual needs, but also looking at, we do want people to wear something in the pool, but I think we need to be recognizing socioeconomic barriers to a lot of people accessing proper bathing suits, as we call them.
Mhm.
Frankly, again, as a pool operator instructor, if the fabric is clean, if it's cotton, if it's not, there's a lot of basic intermediaries steps we can take between real bathing suits and preventing someone from using the pool and creating a damaging experience for them and them disliking ever going back to a pool because of our own set notions of what they should have in terms of equipment or clothing.
For
I
sure.
love that you also talked about staff training. I think that's a big one for all of our aquatic staff who are still on this webinar. If you are looking to do something at your facility, you must train your staff. So, Kaeden, can you talk about, did they have volunteers from the city, or how did they determine who would be either mature enough or confident enough to work with your group during those private rentals?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually wasn't specifically involved in that part of the process, so I'm not sure exactly how it worked. But I think we worked with a specific pool. So the city of Ottawa runs like many pools across the city. We worked with one specific pool, and we chose that pool mostly because it's located downtown, so it's pretty accessible by public transit, like kind of equally distant from different parts of the city. And it's a relatively small pool, so if there's like a really really large pool and you're having a private event or a closed event that only has 5 or 6 people, that might not feel worthwhile to the city. But their pool is pretty small and worked well for us in terms of the logistics. So my understanding is that the folks who are working during those sessions were folks who would typically be working at that pool. So that sort of narrowed it down a little bit. And then I think it was sort of just in collaboration with them. It was at the same time each month. So it was like the second Saturday for this 1 hour in the evening. So there wasn't really anything else going on in the community center at the time. And I think my understanding is that staff were kind of given an option if there was anyone who was really excited about it and wanted to be part of it. They were given that opportunity. At one point, we had a lifeguard who was working during that session who also identified as trans, and it was like that was really really awesome. But yeah, I think it was folks who were interested and wanted to be part of it, or who were sort of open to that. Like people knew what they were getting into when they were assigned to that shift. And then we just made sure that I think all of the folks in that pool were able to attend the training and had all of that information. So it didn't necessarily, of course, it's not going to be the same person forever. People move and change jobs and things like that. But we were also able to repeat the training. So after a couple of years, if we know there's a lot of new staff and maybe new people who are going to be there during that time, we could do another training for those folks. Yeah.
I think that's so important. I worked at the University of Toronto for 7 years, and we had a monthly or bi-monthly trans night. And it was so important. We didn't get the training that we should have gotten in hindsight, but at least the staff it was a volunteer basis, and we were explicitly told what to expect and asked if we could be mature and appropriate and that provide the customer with a positive experience. Because there's going to be people in different places in their education, their experience, what their comfort level is at work. And it's not a recipe for success for anybody putting the wrong people on the pool deck and then creating a scenario where the client or the rental group or the organization has a bad experience, as well as the kids and the attendees. If they don't feel welcome, that's going to be so, so damaging.
For sure. I think these are really good conversations to have, because I think it's often there's maybe an instinct to say, like, of course, all of our staff should feel comfortable and confident working with transgender diverse folks. Of course, everyone should feel welcome and included in the pool all the time. And I agree that's, very, very true. But also I think the top priority is those kids and the experience that they have at the pool on that day. And so as much as like, I would love it if everyone was equally comfortable and confident working with transgender diverse folks and making sure that everyone feels comfortable. The reality is that if someone doesn't want to be part of that program, or doesn't want to work with transgender diverse youth, there's maybe a bigger conversation to have with that person, but they definitely shouldn't be the one running that program.
For sure. And I think it's also going to be administratively, let's talk a little bit about the pool space, Kaeden. Can you describe, it's a smaller pool, I'm assuming, older pool, and so what was it like in terms of blocking off windows, or was it private? Was that one of the reasons you also selected that pool, so that people couldn't, look at the rental? It was exclusive to your group?
Yeah, so this pool worked really well for our needs. So it was a pretty small pool, and it was actually in the basement of the community center. So it's a small community center. I think there's like a basement, a main floor, and an upstairs, and there's a bunch of different rooms that can be rented for different programs. The pool's in the basement, and it's the only thing in the basement, so no one's really going downstairs unless they're going to the pool. There's a small lobby area, so you come down the stairs, and we would have our posters up saying, like, this is the event that's happening right now, so folks knew, that we were there. And we had Ten Oaks staff who were there each time. So I would get there a little bit before the event started, and I would be there to greet people as they came in and make sure that that's what they were there for, and they weren't just coming to come swimming and maybe didn't know. And to do that, I would just say like, hey, are you here for our trans community swim night? And they would say yes, and they would do it. Because we also don't necessarily, we don't know by looking at someone that they identify as trans. We don't want to police people's identities or tell them that they can or can't be there. But we do want to make sure that people know that that's the event that's happening and can say like, yep, that's why I'm here. So there was like a little counter there, and then there would be a male and female change room, and then an accessible all gender change room. And we just put posters over the signs on the doors that said all gender, and that would cover the male or female sign during the time we were there, and then we could take them down when we were not there. Yeah.
I think it's so important to consider any facilities that are interested in starting a program like this, and we've still got a time for a few more questions, so think about those and add them to the chat box. But I will say, having worked at a facility that also tried to offer either women's only swim or men's only swim or a trans swim program, you need to look at your windows, your doors, and creating that private environment, because I've seen a lot of scary posts in Facebook groups for our aquatic professionals that talk about things like, well, they rented the pool, we don't have to do anything for them, we don't have to set up the space. You set up the space for your swim teams, you set up the space for your swimming lessons. If you are trying to do outreach and increase participation in your programs by involving a trans community or different groups, you need to really think about how that